Let's start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O Lord, Master of my life, grant that I may not be infected with the spirit of slothfulness and inquisitiveness, with the spirit of ambition and vain talking. Grant instead to me, your servant, the spirit of purity and humility, the spirit of patience and neighborly love. O Lord and King, grant me the grace of being aware of my sins and of not thinking evil of those of my brethren. For you are blessed now and unto the ages. Amen. John Paul II, pray for us.
Pray for us.
In the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. Well, this is exciting. As we've had lunch and learns before, and if you're a repeat visitor, thank you very much for being here. My name is Andreas Widmer, and I work with a team here at the Sioka Center for Principled Entrepreneurship. And today we'd like to talk a bit about the Gospel of Work, and this is one in a series of lunch and learns that we're going to do in that vein with that theme. And the way I'd like to start is to just basically tell you how this all started. Hopefully, many of you had a chance to look at the lunch and learn at the Gospel of Work and at the videos. Maybe just one or a few or all 16 of them. But the idea actually came through. I wrote a book called The Pope and the CEO, sort of with my insights, because I had a whole career of ups and downs and successes and failures, but I had this first experience in my life, in the sense that my first boss I've ever had was John Paul II, and he kind of taught me what work was about, but I sort of lost my way throughout my career a bit, and put eventually my insights that I learned from him and how I reconcile that with my experience and everything into a book called The Pope and the CEO. And eventually that led me to Catholic University, where I teach now. And then while I'm teaching there, I meet somebody called Luke Burgis, who also just wrote a book called Unrepeatable. And when I read that, I feel like this is another person writing exactly the same book as I wrote, but through their life experience. And we immediately clicked. And we actually started to teach a course together called The Vocation of Business. And what we found as we taught, and then we also coach outside of the business school, just sort of on our own or with the Sioka Center. And what we found is like some disturbing trends that we can actually identify with, because this had a lot to do with where Luke and I both sort of went wrong during periods of our career. I just want to share the screen here and give you a couple of ideas of what I mean with this. So let me see here. I'm not going to make too many slides, but just to set the stage. What caught my attention and Luke's attention early on is this whole idea of disengagement at work, that you have only 4 out of 10 people at a job are actually engaged. They actually care of what's going on. And when I first saw the numbers, I of course want to put it in context, and I saw that Gallup actually has been doing this for a while, and you see that it's not a sudden drop or anything like that, but it is just a very, let's say, if this was an athlete, it would be very weak athlete performance, right? So the actively disengaged, the versus the engaged, it sort of stays in the same range. This is sort of a 10% gain here, but maybe just a 3% gain. But that just shows you that then the middle is what's growing. And that's just looking at it from 2000. So we're not in free fall, but we don't really seem to make any big strides in getting engaged at work. And then let me see, there's this new idea that's coming around, and I think it's a bit of a strange way to say this, quiet quitting, which it's not a very logical name for it, because they're not really quitting, they're just being they're just there's a trend of employees saying, well, I will only do by the letter what I have to do, and then the rest of it I won't do, which, by the way, is exactly people who are disengaged, not the actively disengaged. It's these people here, the 51% of our workforce, and that has been constant for the last 22 years, who just say, look, I only work here. Like, if you tell me to do something, you have to tell me exactly, because I will really only do that. Now they use a new term. They call it quiet quitting. I'm not a huge fan of this term, but nonetheless, it indicates something that's going on that sometimes I even myself experienced in my career. It's sort of just checking out, in a sense of feeling used, feeling like a cog, sort of losing the spirit of really the joy of work itself. And so we thought we wanted to do something about this. We do something about it at school because we teach a class called the Vocation of Business. And in it, we actually focus very much on the meaning of work. If you're looking at the way that the world is set today, there's really two approaches to work. And we talk about this in the Gospel of Work. It's sort of either anything goes at work, and profit is the only objective, and do whatever it takes to do. And that's sort of a cliche, on one side, the Wolf of Wall Street kind of approach. And then we have the other side, which is sort of a cliche maybe of CSR, of saying, well, okay, you're doing that, but then you have to share afterwards. You have to give back, is the word that's often used. And what I observe about that is that this is really two sides of the same coin. And that coin is a materialistic utilitarian coin that only focuses on the outcome, to say, what's the outcome at the end? It's profitability or money, or in some form or the other. And the meaning of work is being defined by the outcome. Well, that's not good enough. What happens if the meaning of work is defined by the outcome? Then people who do the work end up feeling like cogs. They feel like used. They feel like a means to an end. And guess what the result is of that? I've experienced this myself, as I said, is that you feel disengaged at best, and at worst you get actively disengaged because it makes you angry, and it's sort of a pushback. We can look here at the top reasons for people who quit. I think this is from McKinsey. I'm covering this up here with my own thing, but I think it's McKinsey who did this. But you sort of see that the meaning of work is, we're just using the wrong terminology of why people quit, right? If you look underneath, the meaning of work itself is something that we're losing because our culture only has an approach to work that deals with the aftermath, the result of work. And so we basically said, let's go back. I'm gonna pull out of this here. Let's go back and revisit this. And so Luke and I basically made a decision to try to expand this, try to create, only that many people read a book. And we thought if we would create a video series, like a course, and something much shorter and visual, that we could engage with a lot more people. And this is hopefully that is working, to really help ourselves and other people to create a community, a tribe, if you wish, to go on this journey of rediscovering the actual purpose of work, the intrinsic purpose of work, and help us find this and then re-engage at work. And that I hope is a group of people who consists both of people working, for your own motivation and for your own deeper work, but also for people who lead others, who want their employees and their whole teams find that deeper meaning of work and re-engage. And that is really the goal of why we did the Gospel of Work. And Luke, as we started this, you commented on the what is it called, the Great Resignation. Can you maybe take it from here and explain a little bit of where you're coming from with this, and what the Great Resignation really is a symptom of?
Sure. Well, I'm still trying to find out what exactly it is and what it's a symptom of. I haven't resigned in the last 2.5 years, and we've been fortunate that nobody in the Sioka Center has resigned. So I'm hoping that there may be some people on this call who have some existential experience with that, whether they made that decision or somebody within their organization did. So Would love to invite questions,
Yeah.
comments, and open it up from anybody that has thoughts and ideas on this, and maybe even personal experience. So no later than the bottom of the hour, we certainly hope to open the floor, and we'd love to make
Yeah.
this as interactive as we can. Um, First of all, we seem to love giving things names lately, right? We're giving names to everything. Uh, Quiet quitting, right? I think there's probably a point in time at some point where that was called having a job. People have been doing this. I don't know if it's anything new. It may have accelerated, but these are human phenomena that we're looking at. And names matter, right? Names reveal things, but they also conceal things. So I wonder sometimes to what extent, if we had called this phenomena something else, right? Would we think about it differently? Would we talk about it differently? Um, what if we called the Great Resignation, um, the great vocation, or the great thinking seriously about what it is we want in life? Because I know a lot of people that have made changes, have done it from a place of almost there's almost been increased existentialism over the last 2 or 3 years, which is generally a good thing, right? We're thinking about how short life is. We're thinking about how thin some of our desires are, and we want to spend more time with the people we love and doing work that's really meaningful to us. So there's an aspect to this. Everything that's been happening the last few years seems very much vocation driven. People thinking seriously about vocation, which has really been the focus of my work and Andreas's work and the gospel of work. The whole premise is that work is part of our vocation, right? It's part of what it means to be human. We're made to work. And to the extent that there's a greater cultural discussion around vocation, and that's why we're here, I think we're probably going somewhere good, even if it's causing some short-term pain, some confusion about why people are leaving their jobs, about why some people don't seem to be happy. My hope is that we're actually moving toward a place where we have a greater understanding of what work is, which of course is what the gospel of work is all about, right? Work is good news. So Andreas, one question I have for you, and this is something that you and I have talked about quite a bit, speaking of things becoming existential, it seems like everything's existential right now. Like every relationship is existential. Everything kind of hits really deep, and in some sense, that's a good thing, right? We have a greater sense of we're thinking seriously about the really important questions in life. And then in another sense, I think I've heard this phrase from you that when everything becomes existential, or when things become existential in a work environment or in a relationship, then that can make it a difficult place to work. Like once if people in a relationship are constantly sort of threatening to end the relationship, can think about a marriage, for instance, it becomes very difficult to make any progress. Now, a marriage is obviously very different than a company. It's different than a working relationship. But my general read on some of what's been happening in the last 2 or 3 years is that there is a sense of kind of existential crisis that's manifesting itself in various ways. Some of that I think is good. Some of that I think can be bad. Um, and Andreas, I'm just wondering if you've ever thought about it in terms of everything becoming a bit more sort of existential, where
Yeah.
people are thinking seriously about their purpose and thinking about existence itself.
Actually, what this triggers is what you're saying. It triggers this memory of actually, you all know I had a rocky start in the Swiss Guards, and with my new boss that I didn't want to be there anymore. I regretted I joined and everything. One of the things that John Paul talked about is this, one of his favorite sentences, "Ti voglio bene," I want your good. And what he would talk about is that, sometimes the word love in other languages is like in English is a squishy term. Like I love my dog, I love pretzels, I love my wife. Yeah, it's not a very distinguished term. And what he would speak about is that what's really well done with the Italian expression "ti voglio bene," I want your good, is to properly explain what the love looks like the non-romantic love, let's say, look like as a commitment. And the commitment you have with everybody at work is what the Italians would say to each other, ti voglio bene, I want your good. And so that is a very Christian approach to say, and this is what he did to me when he met me, and I was about to basically quit, to say ti voglio bene, I want your good. If this is not good for you, then this is not the right place for you. But every decision I make, I have your good in mind. He loved it because it's probably the expression of his personalist norm, to say the only approach, the only attitude to the human person is love. That means in the context of work that the kind of love you're showing to the other person is not a existential threat love of saying either you do this or this happens, but that still doesn't mean that you're perfect for the job. I mean, ti voglio bene means I have your flourishing in mind. I want you to become the best person with all the gifts that God has given you. And maybe that's here, but maybe that's somewhere else, right? And that doesn't become existential. It becomes actually is what we all yearn for as human beings, is this actual acceptance of ourselves with all of I want to be accepted with all my talents and non-talents and everything. And if we can create teams, and this is something, I mean, look, we're work in progress. We're trying this at this yoga center, who actually accept each other, to say, let me tell you what my strength is, and then you add your strength to my non-strength, and then hopefully we complement each other in that sense. Then you start to have this commonality of ti voglio bene, where everybody helps the other person become more, which is really the vision, the sort of the secondary meaning of work, as John Paul talks about it. And I think that is something that is completely absent in today's workplace.
Mm. Yeah, I know Art Sioka, who's the benefactor of this yoga center, and Andreas just wrote a great book, which was really the culmination of 2 years of having very frequent conversations with Art. Didn't Art, Andreas, if I'm remembering correctly, say something like, I've never had to actually terminate anybody in my whole career, because it seemed like he actually he created certain conditions where people began to have the level of awareness of their self and their fit within the organization, that they would make the decision that was best for them, and that he would do it as an act of love, in a sense, where helping them find a better place. And I don't know if it was Art Sioka, or if I'm thinking of somebody else, where some of those relationships where people were sort of helped to see and understand their gifts and talents, including when they might not be a fit, ended up being some of the people that kind of appreciated him the most in the long run. So it's a completely different, reminds me of, as you were telling the JP2 story, I mean, it's a very practical situation that many of us face, where, there's just a big difference between wanting somebody's good and putting them in a situation where everything is existential, which doesn't feel like this person wants my good. If they're saying either you do this or this happens, that's the opposite of sort of that attitude of love. And it can seem weird to bring love into talking about work and business, but if we can't do that, then what are we doing? I mean, that's what this is all about at the end of the day.
You're right. And so I asked him like about how he attracts the right people. His thing was, you're right. He said he never really had to fire anybody, and he only ever lost one person he didn't want to lose in 40 years, right? And he built this huge company. I mean, it's a lot of people. And when I asked him why, is he early on, and for those of you who are not quite aware of the story, in a very nutshell, I had this privilege. He's been a friend of mine for many years, but at the end of his life, for the last 2 years now over COVID, I talked with Art Sioka for hours every week and recorded it. And he basically gave me the lessons of his life, looking back, and sort of say, before I die, and he knew he was going to die because he had stage 4 cancer, to sort of say what, before he goes to the Lord, to say what he had to say. Now, one of the things he discussed is he said, look, people nowadays, you have companies that talk about the company values and everything, and they and this is sort of the same thing, is they're talking about values have nothing to do with the company. You know, it's nice, this is all nice stuff, but that's the cultures, that's the main culture, public culture's problem, to figure out these popular values or whatever. He says, no, a company needs to focus on company values, and the company values better have something to do with the work you're doing all day. Because if it's not, then you don't give people the chance to flourish, but you're also attracting the wrong people for work that they don't like and then get disengaged with. And he said, these values that have to do with your work and how you want to do your work have to be stated very strongly, and they have to be, he says, you have to walk, what is it called? Walk the walk. I always make that mistake in English. Is it walk the talk or walk the walk?
I don't know if I even know. Walk the.
So whatever, that one is the one. I mean, you know what I mean. And so one of the things he did, he said he wanted to create long-term value, sustainable value, enduring value, he called it. And so he just abhorred this quarter to quarter short-termism that he felt was just destroying companies and making bad decisions. And again, because of this do or die stuff, you create a mentality of fight or flight. But you know what? Fight or flight is only made for extreme circumstances. If you live constantly with fight or flight, you can't do it. You're going to A, make mistakes and bad decisions, and B, you're going to burn out. And so he wanted to say, let's look at the long term, make long-term decisions. And in order to signal to everybody that he wanted long-term decisions and not quarterly decisions, he got rid of all sales incentives and quotas. Imagine this, the guy gets, and yeah, the private company, he got rid of all the sales, commission and incentives, all the commission, or rather all the bonuses in a sense. He said, I want to give you high and rising wages to begin with, so that you don't have to worry about, if I don't reach this number, I can't, send my kids to school. He says, I don't want to play with that. I'd rather take the money and put it into the demand generation on the other side with the customers. And then we have solid long-term demand generation, and the company does better. And then what he wanted to do is to give the people a piece, like a participation in the company overall, so that they could benefit from that. There's more on it in the book, but that's one way that he showed how to signal values very strongly that actually have something to do with the company. And he felt, and so I said, well, you just lost the best salespeople, because I was in sales before, and you know that in sales, these OTE and then above, and there's accelerators above it and everything. That's all they're talking about. And he says, no, I didn't lose my best people. I found my best people, because I made it so clear that anybody who wants that, this is not what we're doing here. That the folks he hired, he never had to let them go, because they were totally in line with his values.
Fascinating. I think it becomes important. How do you signal long-term human value to people and show them the long-term human value that's being created? So one of my favorite stories about this, I just learned this from our colleague Rebecca yesterday. I hope I get this right, but Jay Leno, he was the former host of The Tonight Show. I think he's my favorite host. At the end of his run as host of The Tonight Show, he came out on stage and he brought out all of the children of all of the people who had worked on the show. I think there were 60 plus. I think I've got that right, Rebecca. So you see all these babies, at one point, babies born to staff members and workers on that show just during his run. I think it was 20 plus years or something like that, wasn't it? And it was just I saw it for the first time yesterday, and it was this beautiful visualization of, one, just the actual human life that came out of these people that worked on the show, and an acknowledgement of all of the things that happened behind the scenes that maybe we don't do a good enough job showing it to people. Like all of the good, we're very good. The news is very good at focusing in on all of the problems, but like how beautiful is that to show these families, because of the stability they had, the commitment that they had, they were able to actually create.
That's actually a good, see what a team like that does is they create this probably because they're living it in front of the group, that they're creating that desire, right? Um, to to behave or to pursue certain things. It's interesting in the context of your book, Wanting, and René Girard, which is, we featured it a couple of times on our social media for this. Really interesting book. The whole idea, and René Girard comes out of Catholicism. He has a very good anthropology. And of course, what fascinates me about what you talk about is that there's thin desires and thick desires, right? And so the thin desires is social media, showing everybody what I have for lunch and make myself look good, or whatever. But the thick desires is, of course, that kind of thing of what art did with the enduring value, and what Jane Leno does with saying, look, this is about our families and so on. Do you have an inkling of how could somebody use those ideas in a company to say, let me help invest in thick desires, for myself? How do I develop it myself? And then how do I inspire it in my people?
The most important part of leadership, in my view, and it's taken me a long time to learn, is that leaders actually lead by desire. So that we're actually responsible for cultivating not only our own desires, but the desires of the people around us, right? Every parent knows this, like how much we affect what our children want. It could just be to be fans of, a certain sports team, or to
Absolutely.
think that a certain career or profession is really cool. But every person does this, and leaders in a very particular way have a responsibility to do this. So part of that is having some transcendent desire that goes beyond the short-term view of work itself. And I actually connect this all the way back to John Paul II when he talks about the different dimensions of work. There's the objective dimension, there's the subjective dimension, and then there's the spiritual transcendent dimension, where there's a desire for something that goes beyond just the day-to-day,
Yeah.
whatever it is that you're doing day to day. So one of the most, I think, great examples of this would be John F. Kennedy in the late 1960s visits NASA, sees a guy walking down the hallway with a broom in his hand, and says, "What are you doing?" And the guy says, "Well, I'm helping put a man on the moon." Right? This is a person, so for whatever they had cultivated this desire for something bigger. He didn't
Yeah.
say, I clean the bathrooms. He said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon."
Very
So
good example.
imagine if people felt this sense of pride in being part of a long-term vision and mission, and a desire that goes beyond the work, because your work will never satisfy all your desires.
I bet
You
you,
know,
Luke, I bet you that Pat Lencioni, so we had this privilege that Pat Lencioni was actually coaching the business school professors and team for a while. And one of the things that one of his big insights is to have a rallying cry. He would go to the team and say, "What's your rallying cry?" And that's exactly what we did. Man on the moon, rallying cry all the way. And so he would basically say, in the morning you have what you call a standing meeting, which is you don't sit down. It's a standing meeting that's every morning at a certain time, and everybody stands in the circle and says, what do we do about our rallying cry today? Right? We put a man on the moon. What needs to be done today? I mean, that's what you're saying. It becomes a transcendent value. But of course, my input to that is it has to do with what we're doing. Like, it's not, if we're a shoe manufacturer or something, we can't say we're for world peace, right? That's fine, but that has nothing to do with what we're doing. Like,
right.
It doesn't give meaning to the work I'm doing. That's sort of my constraint to it. Do you agree with that?
I agree. That's part of it. It's not the whole story, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be sort of inherent meaning that we find in the work itself, for sure. But we also need to see the fruits of our labor in some sense. I think it is important to sort of see that what we're doing is actually creating some value somewhere in the world. And I think that's actually sometimes can be one of the difficult parts about purely kind of sort of intellectual labor, is that we don't always, it's kind of hidden. The impact that it has is sometimes hidden. It's not like I'm just, making a thing, right? Which is really satisfying. I mean, I love to make anything or build something in my house because I can actually see it. Sometimes it can be harder to see, but it's there. It's all there, but sometimes we have to work a little bit harder to
Yeah.
see. And I think it's a natural human desire to want to
Yeah.
see.
And there is the role of leadership is of course to help visualize it, and what do you celebrate and how do you celebrate it, and we can visualize a lot of stuff if we pay attention, and because you can also visualize it by pointing it out and then making it a celebration, which becomes visual. We do have a question from Manuel, and Manuel is asking about, if you're going out, like if you're an employee and you're going around interviewing, how do you recognize, how can you tell when whether the company has this personalist view or vision, or if they follow that idea?
Manuel, if you're on, any thoughts or further sort of elaborations on the question? We'd love to hear from some of you.
Hi, Manuel.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for the course. It was very exciting. I'm really trying to apply it in my life currently. So thank you so much for that. Very exciting.
Praise God.
I think I'm part of that great resignation, but more of the thinker type of person, right? Not yet in action, but looking to move on and take my experience into something a little bit, let's say, deeper or meaningful in many ways. So I think it's really hard to weed out the companies that have true values, right? They all come out with values and some particular agendas that they may sound great on paper, but when you apply them, they may have like a double value. Let's say that there's an agenda behind it. So to find a company that is genuine in their values, and their values are really putting the person at the center, not just because it's good business, but because of the person, right? So I think that's, it's kind of what tips will you suggest on how to identify a company that actually believes in it?
Yeah. Luke, you want to take a stab at this? I do have some ideas just from working with the students as well.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of things that I've used in my own life. Obviously, seeing how they treat people, especially junior people. It wasn't very long ago I was kicking the tires on a large company, and I had only interacted with very senior partners and people, and I asked them if I could speak to their most junior person, in fact, an intern, and just to get their perspective, right, on how they were treated. That's just an easy way. You're going to get better intel there, because it's true. You mentioned, Manuel, like they can, on paper, everything sounds nice, everything looks nice, but once you get inside, where the rubber hits the road is how they actually treat people. Another thing I like to do is look for a hierarchy of values. I mean, everybody has values, and they rattle them off, but very few people have, or companies at least, have a clear hierarchy of values, like which values are most important. And when you press some of these organizations on their values, you realize that there's not a lot there. They haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about them. If you ask them, for instance, what happens when these values come into competition? How do you handle that? They don't really have a good answer. So I think, probing and going a little bit deeper and forcing them to think about the person at the center underneath the values, that the concrete person and not abstract values. There are ways to just sort of get under the hood. Andreas, what are your thoughts, having worked with our students?
I actually think that is one of the great developments. I see humanity very positively. I think we're getting better, and we're moving to better places, and we make progress. So what this new generation brings that really inspires me, and some of the great resignation has to do with this, is that they actually care what they do at work, and they actually care about the company values, and that's why people are moving. But when I grew up, I was basically just glad to get a job, and I would work for anybody if you would have me. And that's not healthy. I made many mistakes because of that. And so now what I'm working on with the students is strategy to find out, okay, who is this? It's almost like if you do research about a neighborhood when you want to buy a house, and the realtor isn't going to tell you, the person who sells you that house is not going to tell you anything. So you have to sort of do your research. You have to go visit the neighbors and you have to look at the police report and look at the school system and do the analogy for a company. The beauty is that today with the internet, because we can do a lot of this, I would never go to a company to sign up for a job or to go into a company without looking at LinkedIn and trying to backward and forward integrate about this company. Because of LinkedIn, you will know people who are their customers. You will know people who used to work for them, who work for them now, who might be their suppliers and so on. And it's so beautiful. LinkedIn, usually when you ping somebody on a specific question with this, you will actually get an answer. And you're not doing anything on work, bad. It's people actually welcome this, to engage in a specific conversation like this. And then I would also not, and we do some work with students. I just worked with a student today to coach her on how to go in an interview and ask the questions. And I think, Manuel, that's what you're saying is, so I go in, what do I ask, right? And Luke was speaking of this, of double clicking and maybe a hierarchy of values. What I would say is sort of the trick, they're asking you some trick questions to really show who you are. Well, ask them back to ask some trick questions to show who they are. I love the question of saying, who has been here the longest and how and why? What's your longest employee and why? What's the last party you guys had and what did you celebrate? Another good one. So does your company give Christmas gifts to customers? It's just a trick question, because it's interesting what's going to happen when they give you an answer to this and how they're going to give you an answer. But look, we need to tease out intelligent questions that make people show flags when they're doing this to you. We have to get to know each other. So I hope this helps. And besides, also for us, for you all as a group, we'd love to. So we're a whole team. And we don't mean this to be, we did these 8, now 16, we now have 16 videos, and then we're done. We're trying to develop a community of Catholic professionals to come together, have these lunch and learns, and actually help each other and learn from each other. And we would love to hear more eventually about what stuff you need us to work on. Where do we need to do research? What can we do to help the Catholics out there with the professional working in a professional field. Let me just see. I just saw Clara. Clara, hi. It's nice to see you. You're from Andover, right? And you asked a question. Let me just see. Yeah. So you talk about that often in large companies. It's even more understood that people collaborate with each other to get success for the whole company. And if we go to smaller teams, sometimes that is being disrupted. And in the church particularly, I think you say that sometimes small teams can lose sight of that. I hope I'm saying that right. And I agree. There's always two approaches to this. One is, if you're a member of a team like this, where this has been disrupted, that cooperation is no longer seen as a win. What happens there is that people start to have a zero-sum mentality about work, that your success means my failure, and my success is your failure. And that, in my opinion, has to do with the leadership. So that is where somebody gets patted and the other person gets punched. So that's when there's a zero-sum game of praise, if you wish. And so, but you can fix that even as a team member. I would think there's ways that we do this. Namely, probably what you're doing is to basically collaborate anyway, and then to teach one person at a time on the team that this is actually not a zero-sum game. Luke, do you have an insight into that?
No, sorry, I was looking at Chris's question actually as you were talking.
Okay. Anyway, Clara, I hope this is a good answer. I'm happy to engage further on it. Chris, Luke, why don't you take Chris's question, because I haven't been able to read that yet.
Sure. Well, Chris, if you're on, because it's kind of a long one, would you mind maybe sharing a bit of what you had in mind?
Yeah, sure. I've just been thinking about, as you're talking about habits, which you could almost substitute virtue for. Values are very easy to agree with, it seems like, because oftentimes they're so nebulous that you're for like education or you're for some generic good, and habits are could be potentially much smaller scale and much harder to find easily agreeable because they're oftentimes internal. It's your disposition towards your goods or your work or the things you have or your relationships. But it seems like they're more fundamental because what you are as a company or an individual and what you produce are in some ways an accumulation of these habits. So I'm just kind of thinking about what may be like more bedrock, and to use some of your terminology from the book, you have transcendent desires and transcendent values. It's provocative to me to think about the idea that there may be transcendent habits, because habits don't seem like a thing that fits into the category of transcendence because they're so normalized. So
I mean, it seems like, prayer might be a transcendent habit, right? Cultivating the habit of prayer. It sounds like you may have read some James Clear. I don't know if that's why you're thinking of habits. It's a great question, because habits are the things that we actually do. And what you got me thinking about is there a relationship between habits and vocation? We can obviously have bad habits, and we can have vices that have nothing to do with our vocation, and in fact, maybe holding us back from living out that vocation. And I think the same is true for companies, right? Like, companies don't think of themselves as having bad habits, but they do. And I think there is some analogy to sometimes like what companies need to do in order to discover their true purpose to what a person needs to do. And that's sort of sometimes involves like dying to a certain aspect of yourself, right? To some of those negative things in order to discover your purpose, right? Like unhealthy attachments, what could be obsession with the competitor or rival or something like that. It's really an unhealthy habit. It's like an unhealthy mimetic habit. But no consultant, every consultant would be out of a job very quickly if they went into a company and basically said, you need to sort of like, die to this false sense of, these bad habits that you have either personally or professionally, right? Coming in, one of the things I talk about in Wanting is I tell the story of Zappos, right, which was renowned for having this great company culture. But anybody that spent any amount of time inside of that company would notice within 24 hours that there was a very, conspicuous habit that 90% of the people that worked at the company had, and that was they started drinking at 5 o'clock, and that they were out until midnight practically every single day. That's a bad habit that was somehow like keeping them from living out their personal and their corporate purpose, I think. So that's something I'm going to need to spend a lot more time thinking about that, but I think it's a really important connection.
Yeah, it's almost like habits are your true desires. You can say you desire some things, but habits just are what you do. So it makes
it's interesting. There's so many things I would want to say on this. The first thing is, when we mean virtues, we actually and values. With values, we eventually move towards virtues. And I'm going to just put this in here. Check out this link. We actually work with all of our students on, we developed, our dean, Andrew Abella, developed a whole Thomas Aquinas's virtue tree. He has developed together with the Dominicans an entire virtue tree and a diagnostic where you can go in and figure out the different virtues you want to pursue. I get lost in that thing, and so I let you in there at your own risk, because 2 hours later your eyes are going to pop out, because it's just, St. Thomas, and it's very well done, and it has videos and all that. All students that we have go through this on a semester basis, and they work on this. One of the things that I want to do, I can't do John Paul justice because I can only tell you what I think he said, because I didn't write it down. But what he talked about is that the habits are a reflection of our will, and our will is an reflection of our love, and our love is a decision. So that's sort of how you go up that step. And so the first thing is, he says, you have to work on what you love or who you love. And this is one of the things, of course, with adoration and dedication to God, that we actually invest in that. And that's the first thing to set in our lives, is to say, ultimately, who do I love? Like, what is this about? And so then you set God at that stage. What happens below, and this is where I make analogies to what Luke talks about in wanting, is the church in her wisdom says, yeah, okay, but it's sometimes difficult to both discern what God is telling me, and it's also difficult to imitate God, even though I use it often in my talks that we imitate God. It's difficult, okay? And so the church basically in her wisdom and love for us gives us the saints. And the saints, the saint doesn't need to be a saint to be in heaven, because they're already, this is not for them, this is for us. And John Paul would talk about the saints like, the saint is like the museum of holiness that you go in. It's almost like you go into the art museum to get inspired with what somebody can do with a canvas. Well, in order to go into the saint museum, you get inspired with what somebody can do with their life. And then you start to imitate. And to have saints, and we do in the Gospel of Work, we ask you specifically to find your favorite saints, because what happens then is you expose your appetite to it, and you fall in love. So I for example, I love Enrique Shaw. I think the guy, he should be the patron saint of business, and he's not even quite a saint yet, or hasn't been declared.
Who is that?
Enrique Shaw.
Enrique Shaw.
And he's an Argentinian businessman. He died of cancer, but just really, as somebody I relate to in a big way, and I'm a huge fan. We actually have a stained glass window of him, the first one in the world, in our chapel at the Bush School. And so what happens is then you start to read, you expose yourself to information on the saints, on a specific saint, and in a sense that makes you fall in love. And this has to do with the decision. And then because the love grows, your will for those virtues start to increase. You see how will is a function of love, is a function of your decision. And I think that John Paul II writes about it in Love and Responsibility, which is one of the reasons why this is one of the few books we actually ask people to read in the Gospel of Work, because I think it's very relatable in how he talks about it in there. So let me see.
I picked up this recently from CUA Press.
That's
Absolutely
a
worth
great
reading.
book.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite books.
It's kind of rocking my world. So recommend reading.
I see. So I'm not quite sure if I see. Go ahead, Luke.
I was going to ask Larry if you wanted to ask, because that's triggering all kinds of thoughts, Larry. It sounds like did you actually have an employee say, "I'm not happy and in my life and work"?
No, that was our excellent words. Those were his words. By the way, greetings all from Hurricane Central here in Tampa, Florida.
We pray that
you're safe. I hope you're. Yeah.
I'm looking out my window. I live on a lake. The waves are picking up, but we're on the north side. It kind of headed down. It looks like it's going to hit Fort Myers direct.
Larry, how far inland are you?
Far enough where I didn't have to evacuate. Probably maybe 25 miles as a crow flies to the ocean. Yeah, or the Gulf. Yeah, so we're okay. That picture, my background is my sunset last night. So the calm before the storm.
Beautiful.
Literally the calm before the storm.
My brother always says, "You pray while worrying, you worry while pray." So, yeah. No, we're okay. I mean, and it's
good.
God's will.
Good.
So in any case, so back to my, we have a small business, 21 years running. And as I said in my chat, the Pope and CEO has been really a great way for me to integrate. I've really learned a lot through reading that a few times and so on. But here the thing, we focus on core values too, and I've shared that with Andreas in the past. But my, recently, of course, COVID didn't help, but we're seeing like in the younger generation, certainly a work ethic issue. There's that whole idea of, getting the reward before actually putting in the work. But, but I have a couple of employees that have had crippling anxiety. And one of them that resigned recently, this is exactly what he said to me. He actually put an email to the whole team, because we have to the whole team of, we have about 30 people. And he said this, he said, "I'm not happy with my life. I'm not happy outside work, and work isn't helping," something like this. And he doesn't have another job. And I have another employee that also, and a lot of these people are saying, he's been on antidepressants. I got another one, same thing, really good guy, really smart guy. and he hasn't been able to work. You know, we're trying to hang on with him. You know, I'm not, you know, I haven't fired anybody for quite a while, but yeah. Anyways, that was my question. Is I think it's I mean, COVID didn't help, and I think our current political uncertainty. You know, if all you do is watch the news, and depending what channel you watch, or if you watch them both, all you see is just confusion, right? And so what we have with our faith, I hope, is some certainty. You know, if we go down that path. Okay, that's enough.
Luke, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to to people that are struggling with you know, and mental illness has shot through the roof in the last 3 years. You know, we're seeing our students. There's just a visible difference this semester, for instance, even on campus. So I can't imagine, especially being that age. But the first thing I thought when I read your question, Larry, was you know, when I was in seminary for a few years, and I remember the priest stood up there. We were all going through, as the end of our first year, we were homesick, we were all struggling, and he said, you know, if you have to learn how to be happy anywhere. You know, if you can't be happy here, you can't be happy anywhere. And my first reaction was, well, that's not true. You know, I can think of a lot of horrible, toxic environments where, you know, a change of scenery would be helpful. But I thought in my case, it is true, because here I am living on a hill in Rome. I get to basically wake up every day and, you know, right next to St. Peter's, and in my gut reaction, anytime that I was really going through a dark period, I was at the NAC. Yeah. What was to leave, right? And it's this, like, Ignatian discernment 101 is kind of like, leaving might be the best option, right? So I'm not an advocate of staying where you're at, but there is something to be said for, look, we have like a knee-jerk reaction to just start making all of these external changes, quit my job, move cities. I've done it. I've actually moved to a whole different state because I thought that actually the state that I lived in was my problem. It wasn't. So it's just like, it sort of goes down to discernment and like working on the hard internal stuff first, until we arrive at a point where, you know, maybe changing my job is maybe that's the answer, but maybe I actually need to work through what's going on first.
So what I'm seeing is, first of all, somebody who says this, and I see it myself, Larry. I mean, we work with 200, 300 students every semester, and so we see this. To me, again, I'm looking at it, to me, this is an opportunity. That I think the world is screaming for Christ, for deeper meaning. Young people today have now tasted the emptiness that's being offered to them, and that's why they check out like this. Now, I'm not saying that there is a secret sauce in terms of a process or something, but the answer to that is exactly, you know, in a sense, when I showed up in the Swiss Guards, I was just like a young person like this, to say, I just can't, I need to get out of here, you know, and just, I was just trying to find a way out and away from all of my problems, and I was sick and tired of it. And John Paul didn't convert me in a sense as the Pope. He converted me as a human being, to be there and look at me and care. Like what he did, very simply, and so I give you a silly example of what we do sometimes at our center. We basically have lunch together. That's it. We have lunch together. And there's sometimes students show up who experience our common lunch, and, you know, we'll jovially pick on each other, or we go off on a tangent. It's a bit like this conversation right now. And I'm telling you, to come in, they open up like flowers, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the Ti voglio bene. It's actually the experience of love, where we can even show people the love of Christ, even if they don't recognize it at that moment. John Paul showed me the love of Christ without ever mentioning Christ, or without ever saying what it was, because he showed me attention. He paid attention to me. And I think we can do this. Look, to the Pope, I was less than a valet driver, or, you know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like I'm less than the receptionist or something. I'm just a fly on the wall, and he's supposed to walk by me. If he can pay attention to that person and actually recognize their emotional storm, and reaching out and just like a little bit to just say, hey, I'm glad you're here. Let's do this together. Then we can do this on a daily basis with the folks coming through our doors and through our companies. And I don't think we need a huge elaborate plan. What we need, however, is an individualized plan. And we're drinking from a fire hose. All of us as a team here, we have 250 students in 2 classes right now, and we're trying really hard to give them an overall experience, but then also to work with them individually, because it's difficult to show love to a whole group. You need to show it individually, the kind of ti voglio bene.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then we have, so Phil talked a bit about, yes, what is meaningful work? And we have 3 minutes, so I will come back to this next time. But we have talked about this amongst ourselves, and we're actually thinking that meaningful work has nothing to do with the level of your job, where they say, some people say, well, some jobs just suck. Actually, I don't agree with that anymore. I used to think that. I don't think so, because the meaning of work always comes, the meaning is not in the job, it's in you. And it's like beauty, right? You basically see this. And I want to come back to that, of how do we work in ourselves to find that meaning and to create meaningful work for ourselves and then for others. Before we end here, Luke, do you want to, maybe you had a chance to read some of the things on the side as well. I don't want to shortchange anybody by not addressing their question.
No, just on, one of the best books that I've ever read, which actually inspired the writing of Unrepeatable, was a little book called Personal Vocation. And, he basically says personal vocation is how part of a personal vocation is the way that you find meaning in every experience. And you said in the last part of your comment, Phil, if I'm an employee, finding meaning versus hoping it will be handed to me, there's a big difference, because meaning is not something that you can hand to another person. Meaning is something that's personal, right? It has to come from your personal relationship. So that presents a challenge, which I hope we can talk about next time, for how leaders can't hand meaning to another person, but I would say it seems like they can create the conditions through which it's easier for people to find their own personal meaning.
Right. And Katie, thank you for your question as well. I see that whole idea, the personal professional life integration, and somebody else talked about integration with theology of the body, living an integral life. This is, of course, something we're going to go through as well. The way this is going to work is, of course, we hope you give us feedback and you tell us these things you'd like to talk about. We are very glad you're here, and sort of the founding group. This is the founding group of this, and I'm really glad that you're here. Give us the feedback. We will try to have one of these every month. I hope we get better at it as we go along, and I hope this ends up being a very interactive thing. And let's see what God has in store, what comes out of this. We don't want to prescribe everything and plan this, nail everything down. We want to sort of flow with you, with the Spirit, to see where this is going to lead. And in that sense, we're going to announce in October sometime. I think next time it's you, Luke, who leads one of the sessions.
Yeah, I think I'll be with Brandon talking about the role of beauty and work, I believe, is next.
And we're going to bring in all the different speakers. The first round we're going to do is either Luke and I are always going to be on the call, and then we're going to bring in each one of the speakers of the Gospel of Work. And then from there, God knows where we're going to go. It's basically us as a group with all of you to say, okay, where do we add value and how? And I hope you'll join us for that. With that, I wish you a good middle of the week. God bless, and we'll keep you in our prayers.
Thanks, everybody.